Welcome back. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register, and every week we bring you news and information you can use on your next real estate transaction. Today we're giving you lots of information on the international housing market. We've got so many people moving to Houston right now, and it's interesting that more than 50% of them are moving from other countries into Houston, not just other states. So we're talking a little bit about the international market. I've got Oscar Gonzales here in the studio with me, and if you miss any of today's show, you can go online to HoustonRealEstateRadio.com, where we archive all the shows. So if you miss any of it, go back and catch it, and you can watch it in video as well as listening to it. All right, Oscar, we talked about a lot last segment. I want to talk a little bit this segment about the trends that you're seeing, what's going on population-wise and with the housing trends. I know we were talking earlier about different countries that are investing in the United States in the real estate market. What are the countries that are investing the most right now?
Well, it used to be Canada. I mean, just 5 years ago, it was Canada was the biggest driver, followed by...
They're the closest, easiest to get here.
Right, exactly. And Mexico as well. And then followed by China. Well, China has since outpaced Canada. So we have more Chinese investors coming into the Houston market than we do Canadians. And Mexico has dropped quite a bit as well because their economy is somewhat picking up. So you don't see as much activity in the U.S.
So what do you attribute that to? Anything in particular for the Chinese to be purchasing here?
Yeah, I think they see a lot more bilateral economic transactions happening between the U.S. in general, and Houston's a safe place for them to do it. Also, I think, and it's in the back of a lot of folks' minds, but the expansion of the Panama Canal, as that transpires and happens, and us widening or deepening the port here, I think you're going to see a lot more international business that's not dependent on energy, but I mean other products.
Right. So we have a lot of things in the Houston area that drive people here internationally, like the port.
Right.
What other things do we have that really make Houston attractive?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the medical center for one, but also our port can handle a pretty sizable amount of traffic in terms of tonnage and things like that. So I think even as it's a stopping point, it's still a point of entry for some countries, and I think that's what's more appealing about Houston. Plus, it's also a lot cheaper to do business here internationally compared to, there's a baseline of 0. Well, Houston is at negative 2.2 compared to, say, Tokyo or LA, where it's like 10%, 4%.
Wow.
A lot higher. So.
Okay. So looking at population trends, what have you seen in terms of Houston's population in the past? What has the trend been?
I think what we saw in Houston, we saw an average growth of about 10% every 5 years, so 20% on average every 10 years. But when you look at Houston from 1960 to 2010, and of course the numbers are updated by the Census Bureau, so it's really 2014. But what you saw is a significant shift in the population profile. We went from 1.2 million to 6 million folks. But what was interesting was you saw the white population go from 74% to 33%. You saw the Hispanic population go from 7% to 40%, and you saw the Asian population go from like 0.3% to, I think, 6%. So it's pretty sizable shifts in profile, making Houston now the most diverse, large metropolitan area in the country.
Wow. And where do you see it going in the next 10, 20 years?
I think we'll continue to see that. I think you're going to continue to see that, especially when you see the inbound migration coming from the international side. I think you're going to continue to see, the profile change. But what's interesting is what's also changing is the category of other. That's a category that we didn't have before. I think that by the Census Bureau, and other indicates someone who's multiracial or biracial, and a lot of that is driven by people who are here already. That they're marrying, outside. Say you say a Hispanic marrying an Asian, or a white marrying African, something like that, something different like that. So you're seeing a lot more multiracial profiles than you are one specific group.
Houston really is a great melting pot, isn't it?
It truly
it's
is.
Like the perfect example.
Well, whenever I work with the Census Bureau, they always tell me that Houston is like a petri dish. It'll be like what the country is like in the next 7 to 10 years, and it's true. Whatever Houston looks like, if you look back 5 to 10 years, that's what the country looks like now.
Wow, we're just the leading trend.
We are
for the country. Okay, very interesting. So home ownership overall is growing. More renters now than there used to be. More homeowners now than there used to be.
Right. I think one of the concerns that we're hearing is what about the economy? What is that going to do to housing and things like that? And there will probably be a little bit of softening just simply out of consumer confidence. But I think when you see the population of Houston growing by 10%, you see the demand for housing growing by 12%, home ownership by 12%, and renters by almost 12% as well. So you have housing demand outpacing housing inventory, which is why we're seeing, inventory currently at 2.8%.
Yeah, we still have very low inventory,
yes.
and builders are putting houses on the ground.
Yes.
I think that it's going to get better later in the year when we finally start, getting the inventory going again from new construction, but still such a shortage in inventory for the buyers that are moving here.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Houston learned from the 80s was that you don't let the housing price get too out of control. I mean, it's going up, and yes, it's going to increase because builders are now facing higher costs in some of their raw materials. But what you're also saying is that there's somewhat of a natural governor, if you will, in terms of that price going too crazy. I mean, you can already see some of the cities in California and some of the other states that they're falling back into that same thing where home prices are going up 20-30% a quarter, and that's just
too fast.
That's not sustainable,
right?
You see that bubble happen.
Well, we're already seeing that the Woodlands grew so fast over the last few years, and we're already seeing that tapering off now.
That's correct, right? Yeah, the demand is just too. It just outpaced itself. Is what it was.
Yeah,
so.
And we saw lot prices go up so high, and now people are more wanting to move to Conroe than the Woodlands.
That's exactly right.
That's interesting. All right, so let's talk about some of the cross-cultural relationships. What do you see in terms of country to country? Are you seeing any issues going on with people buying and selling? Are people having any problems when they purchase outside the country or when they come here to purchase?
No, generally what you have is those folks who are coming into the country that they do run into some issues in terms of, what is their citizenship status? Do they have banks and things like that? What a lot of the banks have figured out, especially in Houston, is that you have to accommodate the foreign investor, and that is what they do is they bring them in, create what's called an I-10 number. So they give them some kind of federal ID number that allows
as opposed to a social security number.
Exactly right. So they can conduct business. That's all it's here. That's what they're here for. And then they open bank checking accounts and bank accounts to allow them to do the transaction. For example, we had a situation with a Chinese couple, and it was I think a $600,000 home that they just owned it in the U.S. They didn't ever live here. They just had it as an investment. They sold it. Well, there was one small. I think it was like $1,000 that was supposed to be rebated back to them for something at closing, and the big issue came up was they had no I-10 number, they had no social, and so how do you figure that one out?
Right.
Because Homeland Security has really tightened that up.
Yeah.
And so what they wound up doing is just drop the price towards zero and be done with it. Otherwise, they've got to go to the consulate in China. That can take 6 months. This closing will never happen. It'll take a year for it to close. And so that's what they did. But so you have to find either banks or mortgage companies that understand the nuances of that investor, both outbound and inbound. So.
Yeah. So the I-10 number is a beautiful thing for investors.
It is, yes.
What about for our U.S. citizens who live abroad? Do they have issues getting money in and out of the country?
In some countries, yes. I think there's some countries that are friendlier to the U.S., like let's just say Costa Rica or some of the others. They're pretty friendly. But if you go to some countries like even China, South Korea, it can be a little dicey when you're trying to move money back and forth.
Do you think, or are you seeing that most of the investors are buying with cash, or are they using some loans and leveraging?
You're seeing a little bit of both. And I think most of the time when you see an investor, especially with home, it's cash. It is cash.
Still mostly cash.
Still mostly cash, right. Okay. And part of that is driven by just the culture that they don't trust the banking systems in their respective countries. So a lot of times I'll have realtors call and say, well, gosh, they have a down payment, but the $40,000 is in their mattress. How do I account for this?
Right.
And so you have to find a way to do that. So.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So let's see. What about regional market conditions as far as Houston compared to all the other states in the United States? What's the difference in people moving in internationally? I know here you said it's like 61%.
Right, correct. I think what's happened with a lot of the other destinations, what they call gateway cities, is that it's gotten cost prohibitive. If you look at San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, it is expensive to live there. Chicago.
Yeah.
Houston is very, very affordable.
So real quickly, we have about a minute left. What is important for a U.S. citizen to know when they are going overseas to buy a property? What do you think is the most important thing they need to be aware of? I
think the most important thing they need to be aware of is the laws in terms of ownership and things like that in those respective countries. Because in some countries you cannot own property if you're not a citizen, and arm yourself with the right realtor who knows the dynamics of that country.
And the designation for those realtors is the CIPS?
CIPS, right? That's correct.
Good. So they can go to the CIPS website and find a realtor who's international.
Who's international, and they can kind of shepherd them through that process and let them know the nuances of those cultures in that country.
Very good. Well, Oscar Gonzales, we appreciate you coming in and
Thank you, Shannon.
Great information for our listeners. If you've got got a real estate question, give us a call here at Houston Real Estate Radio, 281-882-8088, and we'll be happy to answer your real estate questions right here on the air every Sunday between 11 and noon. We'll be right back here on Houston Real Estate Radio.
RREA Media has an exciting new product available to companies and organizations who are teaching classes and want to offer those classes online. Introducing Easy Distance Learning. Easy Distance Learning is a video-based distance learning system that allows companies and organizations to leverage their existing classroom content into a broader reach and increased revenues. Did you know that the rate of growth of distance learning is 10 times that of classroom education? And 66% of chief academic officers think distance learning is critical to their long-term strategy. Right now, 33% of higher education students are taking at least one online class. Companies and organizations not offering a distance alternative to in-class instruction risk being left behind. Video-based distance learning has three basic components: classroom capture, post-production, and content distribution. Easy Distance Learning is a comprehensive and modular system that covers all three components that can help your organization with what you are missing in offering a quality and convenient online learning experience. You choose the parts you need help with. Easy Distance Learning offers another revenue stream, a broader reach of your existing content, and a professional presentation with a great learner experience. Contact us today for a free estimate and see how Easy Distance Learning can take your company or organization to the next level.